There are only a handful of apocryphal texts that give us pristine insight into the religious thought of Second Temple Judaism and the formation of early Christian theology. Chief among these rare texts is the book of 1 Enoch. 1 Enoch sheds light on Jewish apocalypticism, and parts of the book of 1 Enoch are considered by many scholars to be Judaism's first major endeavor at apocalyptic literature, contemporary or even predating the book of Daniel in the Hebrew Bible. Although it is only quoted once in the New Testament in the book of Jude, the theological and doctrinal influence that it has had on the New Testament is massive. This influence can be seen in the nature of the Messiah, the Son of Man, the Messianic kingdom, demonology, angelology, the future resurrection, and the final judgment. In short, the New Testament, and especially the book of Revelation, would have likely looked much different if it weren't for the book of 1 Enoch. So what exactly is the book of 1 Enoch? Well, the book of Enoch, usually called 1 Enoch to differentiate itself from the books of 2 Enoch and 3 Enoch, is a pseudepigraphical writing, meaning it was written under a false name. And in the case of 1 Enoch, it's someone pretending to be the biblical character of Enoch, who is mentioned only briefly in the Hebrew Bible in a genealogy in Genesis chapter 5. Enoch became one of the most mysterious figures in the Bible because there are some amazing things that are said about him in Genesis chapter 5. But then again, not much is said about him. Enoch appears 7th in a genealogy tracing the lineage of Noah to Adam and Eve. Enoch first appears in Genesis 5:21, which says, "When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. After he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked faithfully with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Enoch walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more, because God took him." This is a lot different from the other genealogies listed in Genesis chapter 5, because the other genealogies just list their name, the fact that they had other sons and daughters, they say how long they lived, and then it says they died. But Enoch never died. It just says he was no more because God took him. But what does any of this mean? What does it mean that Enoch was no more? What does it mean that God took him? Where did he go? It is very cryptic indeed. And it's for this reason that the book of 1 Enoch was written, because ancient Jews were just as perplexed by this as we are. So people began to write as if they were Enoch to try and explain what happened to him. Enoch, in a sense, became a legend. And what happens to legends? Well, if we look at modern-day superheroes, we'll find the answer. They get background stories. And Enoch, just like all the Marvel superheroes that we have today, had fans that yearned to learn more about them. And so the book of 1 Enoch is Enoch's spin-off literature. It's fan fiction, so to speak. Okay, so if Enoch didn't write the book of 1 Enoch, then who did? Well, the book of 1 Enoch didn't have just one author, it had several. The book of 1 Enoch is a collection of texts that were written by different people in different time periods and likely in different geographic locations. The book of 1 Enoch is kind of like a quilt. It's one quilt, but there's a lot of different fabric woven and stitched together. So if we want to determine who wrote the book of 1 Enoch, we first have to ask ourselves, what part? The structure of the book of 1 Enoch has traditionally been broken down into 5 major sections with 2 appendices added on to the end of the text. But as we will see, even within the individual sections, it's very patchy. There's a lot of different authors writing, and this material is just stitched together. The 5 major sections of the book of 1 Enoch can be broken down like this. The first section is called the Book of the Watchers, and is comprised of chapters 1 through 36. The Book of the Watchers is the most famous section in the entire book of 1 Enoch, and it has gained popularity, especially in modern culture, because in it there are angels and demons and visions and magic, and is apocalypticism to the max. We will take a deeper dive into this section in just a moment. The second section is called the Book of Parables, sometimes also called the Book of the Similitudes. And this section is significant because in it there are many references to a pre-existent Son of Man, which, if you know the New Testament, should sound familiar to you. We will also take a deeper dive into this section in just a moment. Then the third section is called the Book of the Luminaries. We won't spend much time looking at this section, but it will suffice to say that the Book of Luminaries is all about the movement of the heavenly bodies, like the sun, the moon, and the stars. If you are interested in learning more about ancient Jewish calendar debates and how the Jews viewed the universe, then you might want to read this section in more detail. Then part 4 is called the dream visions. And as you can probably guess, this section is all about the visions that Enoch has while he's sleeping. These visions feature the theme of the coming judgment for the sinners in the form of a flood, making way for a new Jerusalem, where the dispersed people of God return and the dead are raised. And lastly, the 5th section is called the Epistle of Enoch. And this section features a summary of all of human history, from Adam and Eve in the very beginning, all the way to the end of the world. This epistle is pseudonymously written by Enoch to his son Methuselah, and it functions as a letter of encouragement that evil will lose and good will win. Then we get appendix number 1, which is an independent writing called The Birth of Noah. The Birth of Noah is a fun little story that talks about Noah's birth, and in it says that Noah was born with white curly hair, and instantly as a newborn baby he began to praise God. And the last chapter, chapter 108, is appendix number 2, titled Another Book by Enoch, which also functions as an encouragement to the believers that evil will lose and good will win. The book of 1st Enoch has 108 chapters, and yes, you heard that correctly, 108 chapters. This is likely not a book you're going to read in one sitting when you have a free afternoon. There is a lot of content in the book of 1st Enoch, and it may take you a while to digest everything it has to say. Now, before we dive any deeper into the first 2 sections of the book of 1st Enoch, there is some historical background information that will really make these texts come to life. So let's start there. All of the constituent parts of 1st Enoch were originally composed in Aramaic, which is the language of ancient apocalyptic literature. The apocalyptic parts of the book of Daniel, for example, were originally written in Aramaic as well. Then, from Aramaic, it was translated into Greek, and from Greek, translated into an ancient Ethiopic language called Ge'ez. We do have 11 fragments of the Aramaic version of the book of 1st Enoch from the Dead Sea Scrolls, but these are just fragments and aren't even close to the entire text. These 11 Aramaic fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered mostly from cave number 4, just outside the Qumran settlement located in the Judean desert, are the earliest copies we have for the book of 1st Enoch, dating from around 200 BCE, to the time of the birth of Christ. Roughly 25% of the book of 1st Enoch has survived in 2 Greek manuscripts from the 4th and 5th centuries, and there is a 6th century Coptic fragment and one 12th century Syriac excerpt that has survived as well. But none of these are the full, complete version of the book of 1st Enoch. They are only fragments. The full version of the book of 1st Enoch comes to us from the Ethiopic language, or Ge'ez language, and it dates to the mid to late 15th century. And if you're thinking, the 15th century? That's almost 1,600 years after it was originally written. Well, yes, you would be correct to question that. Because sure enough, the oldest Aramaic fragments we have of the book of 1st Enoch do indeed differ from the 15th century Ethiopian versions we have of it. And we'll talk more about these differences in just a moment, but for right now, it's important to note why the entire book of 1st Enoch was preserved in ancient Ethiopic. And that is because the book of 1st Enoch is considered scripture and is part of the biblical canon in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. But it also seems likely that 1st Enoch was considered scripture by a number of Jews from the 2nd century BCE up to the 4th century CE. The community of Essenes living in Qumran, who were responsible for writing the Dead Sea Scrolls, likely thought of 1st Enoch as inspired scripture. Many scholars believe that the first section of the book of 1st Enoch, the Book of the Watchers, was written by a Proto-Essene Jewish community, with many shared ideologies with those Jews living in Qumran. It is clear that many Christians also had an affinity with the book of 1st Enoch. Ephraim Isaac, one of the most prolific scholars and translators of the book of 1st Enoch, says, "There is little doubt that 1st Enoch was influential in molding the New Testament doctrines concerning the nature of the Messiah, the Son of Man, the Messianic kingdom, demonology, angelology, the future resurrection, and the entire eschatological theater of the book of Revelation." And the book of Jude in the New Testament quotes the book of 1st Enoch directly. 1st Enoch was also used by the Christian authors of the Epistle of Barnabas and the Apocalypse of Peter, and by the Jewish authors of the book of Jubilees, 2nd Baruch, and 4th Ezra. Many church fathers, including Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Origen, and Clement of Alexandria, knew of the book of 1st Enoch as well. There is also some very similar language from the book of 1st Enoch used in the Gospels. In the book of Enoch, Enoch functions as a prophetic oracle, or mediator between God and man, between the heavenly realm and the earthly realm. Enoch often does this by having visions, in which an archangel is his heavenly tour guide, and the angel reveals many secrets to him as they journey through both the glories of paradise and the terrors of the fiery Sheol. Enoch then delivers his message to humankind, sometimes in the form of a letter to his son Methuselah, and sometimes just as a pronouncement to all of the righteous and to all of the sinners. Enoch's message is the same no matter who he's delivering it to, and his message is this: it's that divine judgment is coming, and that injustice and evil will be destroyed, and finally, the earth will be exactly as God intended it. The book of 1st Enoch is categorized as apocalyptic literature, and apocalyptic literature is often misunderstood today because of its modern cultural references to zombies, but there are no zombies in the book of 1st Enoch. Let's take a quick look at what Jewish apocalypticism is, because this will really help us when we're trying to understand the book of 1st Enoch. The word apocalypse comes from the Greek word apokalypsis, and it means an unveiling or an uncovering. Usually, it's secrets that are being revealed. Apocalyptic literature is a literary genre that foretells the supernaturally inspired, cataclysmic events that will transpire at the end of the world. Apocalyptic literature is eschatological in nature, meaning it always has something to do with the end of the world. It often employs esoteric language, where the information being unveiled is given to one or a few chosen people that have a revelatory experience of the divine, usually given in one of three ways: either by God himself, by a mediating angel, or from dreams and visions of the divine realm, and sometimes a combination of all three. Also common among apocalyptic literature is a pessimistic view of the present, that evil and wicked people are supplanting the good and righteous people, and apocalyptic literature, bad will always lose and good will always win. Apocalypticism became a major trend in Jewish thought during the exilic and post-exilic periods, so around the time of the Babylonian exile and after. Alright, enough background information, let's get to the text itself. But before I do, I should probably mention that the translation I am using and all of the pronunciation and all the spellings of the names is coming from the Hermeneia translation of the book of 1st Enoch. This is a great translation, and it uses the Aramaic names of all of the characters. And in preparation for this video, I also read the book of 1st Enoch from James H. Charlesworth's The Old Testament Pseudepigrapha, which is also a wonderful scholarly translation, but this version uses the Ethiopic spelling and pronunciation of the names, and I find that they just don't roll off the tongue very well, so I'm using them from the Aramaic version in the Hermeneia translation. Now, if you are interested in picking up these two copies of the book of 1st Enoch, I will have them listed and linked down in the description below. The book of 1st Enoch begins with a section called the Book of the Watchers. We are told from the outset that Enoch's words are authoritative, and his authority is based on visions received in heaven and interpreted by angels. And right away, we see one of the major themes that will run throughout the entire book of 1st Enoch, which comes in the form of classic prophetic courtroom language. There is an indictment of all flesh that has been pronounced by God. The righteous and wicked will be judged, and nature is the witness. The inconsistent ways of the sinner is juxtaposed with the consistent ways of all created things, like the consistency of the rising and setting of the sun, the consistency of the seasons. All things that God created are consistent because they obey God's laws. But the sinner, on the other hand, does not. Beginning in 1st Enoch chapter 6, there is an interpretation and an expansion of Genesis chapter 6, which plays a huge role in the book of the Watchers. And really, it plays a big role in the entire book of 1st Enoch. So let's pause and take a look at another one of the most influential and mysterious passages in the entire Bible. Genesis 6, starting in verse 1, says, "When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose." Then, skipping to verse 4, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of men, and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." This is a strange story that, just like Enoch in Genesis chapter 5, leaves the reader wanting more. What does it mean that the sons of God thought the daughters of men were beautiful? And what does it mean that they went into them and had the Nephilim? We are only told that they were the heroes of old, the men of renown. But what does that mean? This is a perfect recipe for fan fiction, and that's exactly what we get in the book of the Watchers. The leader of the Watchers, which is a fallen angel named Shemihaza, was dedicated to going down from heaven and having sex with the beautiful human women on earth. But Shemihaza didn't want to be the only watcher to do this because he knew it was a great sin. So he made the other watchers swear an oath that they wouldn't turn back. The total number of watchers that swore this oath were 200. Then Shemihaza and the other watchers did indeed go down and have sexual relations with the women, and the watchers revealed to them sorcery, evil magic and medicine, and incantations for magical spells, as well as teaching them the practice of cutting roots and studying plants. All of these things are related to the ancient practice of divination, which is strictly prohibited in the Mosaic Law in the Torah. Then the human women got pregnant from the affairs they had with the evil watchers, and they gave birth to the Nephilim, a race of giants. It didn't take long for these giants to start creating some serious problems, because they started eating up all of the food, leaving nothing left for the humans to eat. And once all the food was gone, the giants ate the humans and drank their blood. Then we get another story of a watcher named Asael, listed as the 10th highest in the rank of the evil watchers. And Asael taught humans how to make weapons for war, like swords of iron and shields and breastplates. Asael showed women how to adorn themselves with silver bracelets and with makeup. All of these things the watchers were teaching the humans were evil, and it caused war and violence to increase upon the earth. Then the 4 archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, looked down from heaven and saw the bloodshed. So they went to God and talked with him about what should be done. God commissioned Raphael to bind Asael hand and foot, and to cast him into the darkness of the wilderness, and to lay beneath him sharp and jagged stones, and to let him dwell there for a long period of time. Then when the day of judgment comes, Asael will be thrown into the flaming Sheol. And Gabriel was commissioned by God to destroy the Nephilim by letting them battle one another in war. Michael was commissioned to bind Shemihaza and the rest of the watchers for 70 generations, and to eventually destroy them by throwing them into the blazing abyss. Michael's job was also to make the earth godly and beautiful once again. These are some of the earliest references to hell in all of Jewish literature, although the word hell is never actually said in the book of 1st Enoch, but we get visions that Enoch has of an eternal, fiery place of torment that the evil watchers will spend all the rest of eternity in. That sounds pretty much like hell to me. The next section of the Book of Watchers features Enoch's many visions. Enoch falls asleep while reading a memorandum from the Watchers to God, and the archangels become Enoch's heavenly tour guide. He is shown a place that is basically the underworld, a place created as a prison for fallen angels, where they will live forever. The Book of the Watchers ends with a fairly lengthy description of 3 dark hollows, which represent different places for evil souls to eternally rest. Then there is one illuminated hollow with a fountain of water springing up in the middle of it. Enoch eventually sees paradise, which is the restored Garden of Eden. There are mountains and trees with wonderful smelling fragrances emanating from them. Then there is the tallest tree with the most potent fragrance, and it is described as wonderful and cheerful, and it is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree Adam and Eve ate from in the Garden of Eden when they disobeyed God. This is how the Book of the Watchers ends. The Book of the Watchers probably took its present form by the mid to late 3rd century BCE, so roughly 250 to 200 BC. The last section I want to expand on is the second section, and it is called the Book of the Parables. The Book of the Parables can be broken down further into 3 sections, as you can see on the screen. The book as a whole depicts a series of journeys where Enoch ascends to the heavenly throne room, then he visits the astronomical and other celestial phenomena, then visits the place of punishment. This section's real claim to fame is its frequent usage of the phrase, the Son of Man, as it refers to its own Messiah-like figure. But these phrases are very similar to the way the New Testament talks about Jesus. There are other phrases in the Book of the Parables that are reiterated in the Gospels, like in 1 Enoch 38:2. It says, "It would have been better for them if they had never been born," which sounds almost identical to Matthew 26:24, which says, "The Son of Man will go just as it was written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." The Son of Man references and Matthew directly quoting 1 Enoch 38 shows that there is definitely a relationship between these two texts. The messianic theology of the book of 1 Enoch also shows a lot of similarities between the book of 1 Enoch and the New Testament, with passages such as 1 Enoch 48:3. "Even before the sun and the constellations were created, before the stars of heaven were made, his name was before the Lord." This sounds very similar to the prologue in John's Gospel. Then 1 Enoch 48:5-7 says, All who dwell on earth will fall down and worship before him. For this reason he was chosen and hidden in his presence before the world was created and forever. For in his name they are saved, and he is the vindicator of their lives. If you are familiar with the New Testament, this should sound almost identical to how Jesus is described. But no. The book of 1 Enoch in chapter 71 tells us that it's Enoch himself who is the Son of Man. So what's going on here? Did the book of 1 Enoch influence the New Testament, or did the New Testament influence the book of 1 Enoch? What came first? Well, it depends on what scholar you ask. Some scholars believe that it predates the Christian era and dates to around 105 to 64 BCE. Yet other scholars would date the book of the parables between 40 and 90 CE. So we are left with a bit of a conundrum here, but it's significant to note that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are no sections of the book of parables. So could this mean that it wasn't written yet? Well, many scholars say yes. So it's very possible that the New Testament was written first and the book of 1 Enoch incorporated New Testament material into it. But this is just a guess. It's also very possible that the book of 1 Enoch was written first and the New Testament incorporated 1 Enoch material into it. The book of 1 Enoch is one of the most influential texts in all of Second Temple Judaism, and it had major ramifications for the development of early Christian theology. But for us today, it is hardly ever mentioned in any mainstream religious setting. And for this reason, most people don't even know it exists. 1 Enoch is a collection of texts that feature so many fascinating topics, from apocryphal acts of demons to ancient magical practices and beyond. It laid the groundwork for a comprehensive Jewish and eventual Christian understanding of life after death, and included heaven and hell. It's a book of secrets that has only recently been published in the Western world. If you find the book of 1 Enoch fascinating, let me know down in the comments what intrigues you most about this lost Jewish apocryphal text. Also, I want to know if you would be interested in me doing an entire video on the biblical character of Enoch, because there are some incredibly fascinating Babylonian and Sumerian texts about him. So, would this interest you? Let me know. And if you found this video informative, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to this channel for more religious and historical content. And as always, stay thirsty for knowledge, my friends.